Right. Good afternoon, distinguished professors, esteemed participants, ladies and gentlemen. It is my distinct honor and privilege to welcome you all to this international webinar on the future of World Trade Organization, themed Decline and Reformation. Today, we gather at a pivotal moment in the history of global economic governance, a moment that demands reflections, critical analysis, and visionary dialogue. Since its inceptions in 1995, WTO has been the cornerstones of the multilateral trading systems, promoting rules-based trade, reducing barriers, and fostering economic cooperation among its 164 member nations. The institution's creations heralded a new era of global integration and promised a level playing field for both developed and developing economies. Yet, as we approach the third decade of its existence, the WTO faces unprecedented challenges that threaten its legitimacy, efficacy, and very survival. Over recent years, WTO has encountered growing criticism from negotiation stalemates to the paralysis of its dispute settlement mechanism and surge in protectionist policies worldwide. This institution has been facing with the hurdles, and there are several profound questions. Is WTO still fit for the purpose of today's rapidly changing and increasingly fragmented global economy? How it can address emerging trade realities shaped by digitalization, climate imperatives, shifting geopolitical balances, and crucially, can WTO reinvent itself to remain a relevant and effective forum for the global trade governance? This webinar provides a timely platform for robust scholarly debates, policy-oriented discussions, by bringing together academics, trade experts, legal scholars, policymakers, and professors. We aim to dissect the cause and the consequence of the decline of the WTO. We explore today the rise of regional bilateralism and the trades unilateralism. We examine the challenges posed by the great power rivalries and most importantly, chart out viable pathways for the WTO reforms and renewal. Let me take a moment to acknowledge and express our deep gratitude to our honored guests and speakers. Our chief guest for today, Professor Dr. Sheila Rai, Professor of Law, National Law University, Odisha. Our guest of honor, Professor P. Siri Sudha, Professor of Law, SRM, School of Law, Chennai. Our keynote speaker, Professor Srinivaslu NS, Professor of Law, West Bengal National Law University, Juridical Science in UGS, Calcutta. And our distinguished speakers, Professor Tilottama Raichuderi, Professor of Law in UGS, Calcutta. Professor, the last speaker of today's program, Professor Dr. V. Sodish, Dean Faculty of Law, Chairman, Department of Studies in Law, University of Bangalore. And of course, our welcome address will be delivered shortly by Professor M.S. Benjamin, Dean Faculty of Law, Chairman, Department of Studies in Law, University of Mysore. Throughout this afternoon, our discussion will traverse on critical themes, including breakdown and the future of the WTO appellate bodies, and the implication of great power competition on the trade governance, and the need for WTO engagement in digital trade like AI governance, such as Industry 6 and Great Trade, and the representation of interests of Global South in the trade negotiation, particularly the impact of US-China trade negotiations, and of course, China and US multilateral tensions. As we embark on this intellectual journey together, let us keep in mind that the future of WTO is not merely a question of institutional survival, but it is also a broader reflections of our collective commitment to a cooperative, rule-based international economic order, one that promotes peace, prosperity, and sustainable development for all. I look forward to rich and exchanging of ideas, rigorous inquiries, and constructive debate that will, I hope, contribute a renewed understanding and reinauguration of the WTO role in the 21st century. Thank you one and all. I wish you a productive and enlightening webinar. Now, I invite Professor Benjamin to deliver a welcome address. Sir, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon to one and all. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome you all to this important webinar on the future of WTO, decline and reformative pathways, conducted by the Department of Law, University of Mysore, Mysore, Karnataka. Distinguished guests, learned speakers, invited delegates, faculty members, researchers, students, and all attendees or participants who have joined this webinar to deliberate on these timely and critical issues. Before I proceed to welcome you all, let me briefly explain the background of the WTO without touching the main issues which are reserved for main speakers. As you all know, the WTO came into force in 1995 by replacing the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or in other words, GATT of 1948. From 1948 to 1994, the GATT mainly dealt with trade in goods, whereas the present WTO deals with not only trade in goods, but also trade in services and intellectual properties. The WTO aims to facilitate international trade by reducing trade barriers, both the tariff and non-tariffs, to trade. This promotes greater market access, free and fair trade among the member countries, avoids unilateral approaches, and provides support to developing countries to integrate their economies with the global trading system. By incorporating in it the two fundamental principles, such as the principle of the national treatment and the principle of a most favored nation status, the WTO prohibits discriminatory practices and treatment among the member states. There are around 60 different agreements which form the legal foundations for world trade. The WTO represents 98% of the global trade, and it is the only international organization dealing with the global rules of trade. However, in recent years, WTO has faced unprecedented challenges such as negotiation deadlock, dispute settlement crisis, ineffective monitoring of functions, erosion of MFN, the status, geopolitical tensions, rise of protectionism, trade war, and unilateral decisions. According to today's newspaper, US announced to levy 25% tariff on Indian, 35% on Canadian, 30% on South Africa and China, 39% on Switzerland, 50% on Brazil, the products. India will also face additional penalty for importing oil from Russia. We are fortunate to have among us scholars, Professor Dr. Sheila Rai, as a chief guest from the National Law University of Odisha. As a guest of honor, Professor P. Sri Sudha from SRM School of Law, Chennai, Tamil Nadu. Professor Srinivas Lenes as a keynote speaker from West Bengal, National University of Judicial Sciences, Kolkata. As speakers, We have Professor T. Ray Chowdhury, West Bengal, NUJS, Kolkata, Professor Dr. V. Sudesh, Dean Faculty of Law, University of Bangalore, who are going to deliberate on various issues of WTO. I welcome you all to this, the important webinar. I also welcome all participants, members of the organizer team, coordinator, Mr. Syed Kudrat Hasmi. I wish this webinar a fruitful deliberations and meaningful outcomes. I thank you one and all and welcome you all once again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I request the host team, Ms. Sarah, to introduce our chief guest, and we shall formally proceed with our speak. Ms. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests, colleagues, and participants from around the world. Today, we are privileged to be joined by one of India's most respected scholars in the field of international trade and investment law, Professor Dr. Sheila Rai. Professor Rai currently serves as a professor of law at National Law University, Odisha, where she has played a pivotal role in shaping the university's academic vision and contributing to its growing reputation in legal scholarship. With over 2 decades of academic and research experience, she brings unparalleled expertise and insight to the areas of WTO law, international trade regulation, and investment law. Over the years, she has taught at several premier law institutions and has contributed significantly to the evolution of legal education in India. She has been closely involved in mentoring students, guiding research, and spearheading initiatives in global legal studies. Her scholarly contributions are equally impressive. She has authored several acclaimed books on trade law and has published extensively in national and international journals. Her work on anti dumping measures, safeguard actions, trade facilitation, and dispute resolution under the WTO framework has been widely acknowledged for its depth, clarity, and policy relevance. Beyond academia, Professor Rai has also been actively involved in capacity building and academic collaborations related to international trade law, engaging with both scholars and practitioners across borders. Her presence here today is both an honor and an opportunity for us to learn from a leading voice in the field, one who combines rigorous scholarship with an unwavering commitment to legal education and reform. Please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Professor Dr. Sheila Rai. We look forward to her address and the insights she will share with us. Thank you.
Professor Rai, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you for rather flattering introduction. Respected Professor Benjamin and distinguished guests and speakers for today's session. I'm sorry I did not make any slides because my right hand is injured. So I'll speak extempo. Thank you. I mean, I congratulate the Mysore University Law Department and the Dean for actually organizing this webinar on a very timely topic. It is like it's one of the most burning topics with Trump tariff and Trump back in his actions. All the newspapers are sort of and news channels are that what is happening to WTO? Where is in all this tariff war? Where is WTO? Now, WTO is actually where it was actually supposed to. So, I mean, in short, what I'll say is that we have domestic sphere, we have laws and regulations, right? But that does not mean that immediately there is, just by enacting a law, there is a rule of law. That there will be violations. So laws are there to ensure that if violations happen, there is a recourse available. Now, WTO is like what happens in domestic sphere, that whenever someone acts illegally, the aggrieved party says, I'll drag you to the court. Because they have that sort of protection of the existing laws and that faith in the legal system, where they say that if, as an aggrieved, if I go to court, I have a chance of getting justice, right? And that chance they naturally weigh more than the cost that they will bear, because that is why they say they will go to the court. So this is the same as what is happening with WTO. Everything is happening, but everyone is threatening that we will take you to the WTO, we will complain to the WTO. Although WTO adjudication is very much stagnant right now, but still people are making complaints there. So that shows, in all this crisis, that shows a sort of a faith in that system. Now, to understand the crisis that we are facing today and why we are panicking, let me go a bit to history. So being a teacher, I have to start everything with history. Now what is happening today is not something new. It has been happening. Now, in America, in United States, we have Democrats and we have Republicans, major two parties. Traditionally, Republicans have been very jealous of protecting US sovereignty, especially economic sovereignty, and they have been sort of resistant in any sort of trade liberalization. Democrats have been more pro liberalization and more liberal in joining international organizations. Now, this happened sometime like in the interwar period, that is between the two world wars. The same type of problem came. And so after First World War, to tide up the economic crisis, the Republicans brought a famous legislation that is known as Smoot-Hawley Act. So Smoot-Hawley Act did what Trump is doing right now. That is, it increased US tariffs against imports, and that had its repercussions. It increased tariff wars, and many blamed this Smoot-Hawley Act for bringing about the Second World War, because it sort of had a very devastating effect on the German economy. Now, now the thing is that traditionally, it's not hard and fast, but Republicans, their vote bank is largely the industrial group, and Democrats, their vote bank is largely the agricultural group. So Democrat voters basically want protection in agriculture, but they want availability of industrial goods at a cheaper rate. So Democrats are generally more pro-liberalization. Republicans, their vote bank is in the industrial north. So they always, for their voters, they always talk about protection for the manufacturing sector and protection for the industrial sector. So they are always for protection. Protection in trade and protection against imports, because they want to protect their industrial vote bank. Now, as it happened, when the crisis came in, it was a Democrat president, President Roosevelt, who sort of brought in the New Deal program, and his Secretary of State amended the Smoot-Hawley Act and brought the Reciprocal Trade Agreement Act. Right. And he said that, see, this type of tariff war is not helping anyone. So what we do is that we liberalize trade on the basis of reciprocity. That is what Trump is all right now talking about, reciprocity. So that is, it was Cordell Hull brought about this Reciprocal Trade Agreement Act and said that it is that on the basis of reciprocity, we sort of, it is better that because all of us have to buy and sell in each other's countries. So on the basis of reciprocity, we liberalize trade. So that reciprocity is the term which Trump has sort of is sort of emphasizing these days. Right. Now, this was one. So tariff war was happening that time also, thanks to the Republican politics at that time. Now, when the tariff war was happening, European started by United Kingdom and then followed by the European countries, because European countries had colonies. So United Kingdom started the system of imperial preferences. That is, with all its colonies, it had a liberal trade, but with countries which were sort of not part of that colonial group, what we now call Commonwealth. So that were not part of that colonial group, the trade were on, imports and exports were on a harder terms. Other European countries also had colonies, so they started this type of preferential trade treatment with their colonies at that time. US had a problem because it didn't have that type of colonies, right? So it was losing out in that preferential trade system. So it was the United States which had emphasized that after the Second World War got over, it was the United States which had emphasized that the future trade regime has to be on MFN basis, that is most favored nation basis, and this type of preferential treatment should not be there because US exports were suffering because of preferential treatments. Now, Trump is sort of modifying this system by putting random tariffs against different countries, and that is sort of against the MFN norm. But then the fact is that it was the United States which had emphasized on MFN system because it was losing out in the preferential trading system, right? And it may lose out again if it doesn't back out. Now, after the world, now this is a little background, after the World War was over and the Bretton Woods institutions were devised, the International Trade Organization did not come into existence. That is the third leg of the Bretton Woods stool. It did not come into existence because United States did not join. United States did not join because by that time, Republicans were in majority in Congress again, and the Republicans did not want United States to join ITO. So again, it was the Republicans who had sort of taken a stand against trade liberalization. Right? Now, GATT continued because under the Cordell Hull's Reciprocal Trade Agreement Act, President had the executive power to sign tariff and trade agreement with other countries. So President Truman, who was a Democrat, he signed tariff and trade GATT under his executive powers. But it needed ITO. For ITO, they needed Congress ratification, and since Congress was now dominated by Republicans, US did not join ITO, right? So this is, Republicans have traditionally been sort of against trade liberalization. Trump is dramatizing it a lot, but that has been their sort of their stand always. Now, GATT continued and quite successfully because it was a provisional agreement and it was a major success. It was a major success because when colonies started getting independence, all of them joined GATT, right? Because finally every country has to buy and sell. So they sort of joined GATT and they knew that they will have more to gain in being part of the system than being outside the system. Right. Now, when WTO came into existence, the geopolitical situation was something that, now when Uruguay round negotiations started, United States had a big agenda, but developing countries resisted at that time and many of the negotiating agendas were dropped. By the time WTO came existence, the geopolitical situation had changed. And the change was that the USSR had sort of ended and the world had become a unipolar world, more or less, because it was, for some time, it was US dominance, right? Again, the president was Democrat, that was Bill Clinton, right? Now, and with the majority in Congress, right? Now, now, enthused with that success, that they were able to push many issues in Uruguay round because of the geopolitical situation at that time. Immediately when the WTO came into existence, in the first ministerial conference only, United States introduced many new issues, right? And United States and supported by other developed countries, they introduced many new issues, thinking that they will be able to push it, right? That was the first major mistake, right? Because WTO had come into existence, the developing countries and many other developed countries were also sort of adjusting to the situation, now trying to push investment, competition, trade facilitation, everything that we can push it down the throat of the developing countries and the other remaining world. That was, they overestimated their influence. And that the whole thing was that all the issues were, I mean, Doha round, which led to it, most of the issues got lost. Only we had this trade facilitation agreement, and the important point of trade facilitation agreement is that it has a very effective provision for special and differential treatment. So that shows the power of the rising power of the so-called third world, right? That under the WTO agreements, the special and differential treatment is more or less time lag, nothing more than that. In trade facilitation agreement, it's also like that, but it is much more effective. So that shows the power of third world, because that is now the majority in the WTO membership. Now, the geopolitical situation in 30 years from 95 to 2025 has changed a lot, right? Now, the world is not a unipolar world. Economic situation, I mean, not in the, from 47 to 95 to 2025, it has changed a lot. Even from 95 to 2025, it has changed a lot. World is no longer a unipolar world. What were the largely hungry developing countries, many of them are now sort of not economically well off, if not in the developed club. So the pinch that US and many other developed world they are facing is that they face the pinch of that they don't have the same power, right? And that is what Trump keeps on saying, making America great again, making America great again, right? So making America great again is not a bad dream, but then it is like what speaks is that what one can call that white man's superiority complex, that sort of they want to reinforce, right? And that they are not able to do it because developing countries led by India, Brazil, and some other countries also, that is, they are a very influential force in WTO, right? So they are not able to get their agreements like fisheries subsidies, agriculture. So the agreements that they want, they are not able to get it, right? They are not able to further amend the trips. So all that they are not able to do is because one is we have learned the negotiating tactics, and the other is that we are not so poor and unimportant as we were in 47 and comparatively in 95. And the world is also not a unipolar world anymore. Right. Now, so three issues that were there in now, if we take a stock, right? So one is that geopolitical and global economic situation is different. The second is the issues that were there in pre-GATT era. One was tariff war. So that happened because of escalated by the Smooth-Hawley Act. So tariff war, what in GATT they brought about was tariff bindings. That you will not increase your tariff beyond that limit. So from zero to tariff binding, that it is flexibility you can maintain. Most of the countries are respecting that tariff binding. Okay. The other was the issue of imperial preferences, in which United States was a big loser. Right. Now, MFN is something which United States is sort of, MFN is one thing that United States is endangering, because what Trump mistakenly thinks is that they can use US power to pressurize other countries in bilateral trade agreements, right? So like India US FTA did not work out, so Trump imposed tariffs. Now this sort of, and it keeps on threatening that if you do not enter into FTA as per our choice, we will keep on imposing, we will put penalizing tariffs against your imports. Now that is something now this was US was a loser at that time, and US had insisted on MFN, right? But Trump is not so much in favor of him. Does not seem to be respecting that, because it wants one-to-one trade negotiations where they think that they can pressurize other countries. Right? They can do that with Bangladesh, but they can't do that with India. Right. Now, the thing is that if this happens, if this continues, problem is again US will suffer. Now, US will suffer because US is not the only country with which countries are signing FTAs. Right? Now, Trump tried to dismember sort of European Union also, and it succeeded in getting UK out of European Union. But European Union still holds solid, right? And other countries will again sort of enter into different type. BRICS is anyway, Trump is getting angry with BRICS, right? So compromising MFN will finally hurt US economy only, and at that time Cordell Hull and US negotiators had thought it right. I mean, rightly they thought that largely we should have trade on MFN basis. And doing again with that is like, it may hurt because African countries have their own trade agreement. SAFTA is not very successful, but still BRICS countries have. Middle East, anyway, sort of Middle East with Russia and all, anyway, US will lose out. European Union is a heavy bloc, which is continuously irritant in trade terms to United States. So this is not going to help Trump or US economy anyway. So I mean they are undoing what they had done, but that will help. Now whether these tariffs and bilateral negotiations are hurting WTO, one does know, because for MFN, two important exceptions were there. One is that under GATT, it was Article 24. Under GATS also, it is Article 15 bis, I think. Article 15 bis. And yeah, so for these countries, these provisions allowed regional trade agreements and free trade agreements. So WTO was never intended to be the only trade organization and only trade agreement, right? It laid down basic ground rules for international trade and a major multilateral trade agreement, but it had sort of the negotiators at that time had understood that there will be bilateralism will continue, right? So free trade agreement, regional trade agreement, bilateral trade agreement, these type of agreements will continue, and that is why an exception to MFN has already been provided there. So what is happening is not something which, there has been a lot of debate about whether these FTAs are building block or stumbling blocks to multilateralism, but WTO is there as a major organization laying down ground rules on trade, and within that for furthering trade liberalization, because basic liberalization has happened in WTO, but for additional liberalization which WTO finally envisages, for that it has made possibility of having free trade agreement and regional trade agreements. And then a major other exception which it had made was, that is another problem that which United States is facing, and it is talking about reciprocity. That is that it had made because in the WTO, in the GATT era, developing countries, when they became majority in GATT, they had complained that terms of trade are not in their favor because they are economically poor, their manufacturing capacity is less, and they are basically largely exporters of primary goods and importers of finished goods. So they said that this is imperialism working same way through GATT and all these Bretton Woods institutions. For that, Harberler Committee was established, and that committee supported the contention of developing countries, and a major exception was brought in, that was generalized system of preferences, that imports from developing countries can be imported at lesser tariff, right? And then an amendment to GATT was made, and Part 4 was added, where it was provided that during negotiations, developed countries should give more concessions to developing countries, and in return of expectation of lesser concessions. So basically, Cordell Hull's idea of reciprocity was modified to Part 4. Right. Now that is what Trump wants to undo. Right. One is that imports from like India's GSP status. So in his last term only he had done away with other countries. Some very few countries now have in United States. And the other is that through reciprocal trade agreements, what it is trying to do is, I mean, through these FTAs and RTAs, it is what is trying to do, so that the trade liberalization is on reciprocity base, and you should not expect more concessions from developed countries than you are giving. Now, that is a major challenge which developing countries have to, I mean, they have to take care when they enter into these type of FTAs and RTAs with developed countries. I mean, these agreements will keep happening, but then that how much you are giving in, because after a long fight, you got Part 4 of GATT. So when there is a multilateral trade negotiations, and one of the reasons why Doha round failed partly was that developing countries expect more market access more market access than they are ready to give. So, and Part 4 legitimatized. But through this RTAs and FTAs, that with harping on reciprocity, this major achievement that developing countries had made in the GATT era, they may lose out. Now, current crisis. Now, current crisis is one major crisis is adjudication process. That is, the dispute settlement system is more or less stagnant. It's not that complaint disputes are not going, disputes are going, but panel findings come out and then it is like countries go on appeal and there is no appellate body. Now, this is again an arm twisting done by United States because some of the decisions happened against United States. Now, the appellate body has been as diplomatic as it can be, but there have been decisions with which United States has not been happy. Now, the procedure is given in WTO agreement to overturn, for authoritative interpretation, that if countries don't agree with an interpretation, they may they may adopt an not working. So problem with adjudication, problem with the adjudicatory branch is that it gave certain decisions which US did not like, so it stalled the appellate body constitution only. Now, what has to be done is that we need to be sort of patient and use this crisis for our advantage. Now, there have been efforts being made to reform the adjudication system. And it is best that developing countries push it to reform the system in their favor, right? Because what is happening nowadays, because developing countries are also losing out. Now, that is what is happening now is that suppose a panel appellate body, so permanent appellate body is there, right? But what happens in panel is that when panel is constituted, what they do is that Geneva around people they call and put in the panel, right? So many of the developing countries, people are not there, and who are there in Geneva, they are not very prone towards developing countries' interests, right? So when it is a reform as it is happening, there should be a full-scale reform with more representation of developing countries, more diversity in penal constitution. So everything should be reformed in a way which takes care of the interests of the developing countries. So, and I mean, many of the countries have to think about of also whom they are appointing in appellate body. Like in India, usually what it happens, we send diplomats in the appellate body. Now, other countries send their people who are experts in WTO law, right? So they are able to sort of in the adjudication process, they are able to take care of the provisions more carefully than a generalist like a diplomat will. So that type of reform every country has to think about at its own. And at the WTO level, it is best that, I mean, this crisis will tide over, but it is best that you use this crisis for, we use this crisis for our advantage and push for a whole-scale reform of the WTO, where in the adjudication process, the developing countries get more leverage and, I mean, less powerful countries or third world countries get more leverage than they have now. Right. The other problem, tariff escalation and tariff war, we have already discussed that this is that whole Hull's formula of reciprocity, which Trump is emphasizing these days. That I mean, the FTAs and RTAs, which countries enter with developed countries, they need to be very careful that whatever they have achieved through, I mean, they made very limited gains through adding part 4 and the GSP. So they have to be careful that in these negotiations, they don't give away that advantage. That is one problem, because in multilateral negotiations, developing countries bargain, or I mean, countries have groups. So they negotiate as groups, so they have more leverage. In one-to-one negotiation, which Trump is trying to force on every country, because they know that developed countries have more leverage on less powerful countries, right? So they have to take care and stand by what they have gained through the present system, through what they have gained through GATT. But these type of tariff trade negotiations and tariff negotiations will continue to happen outside WTO, and it was always thought that it is like multilateral trade negotiations will be few and far between, because 170 countries sitting and agreeing on an agreement and on a deal is much more difficult than 2-3 countries negotiating. So these type of tariff and trade negotiations will keep happening. So there is nothing like which will not be there. But what is there is that all these RTAs and FTAs, they are proceeding on WTO legal base. So when they have any provision for safeguard measures or subsidies, so WTO norms become their ground rules. So all these RTAs and FTAs are basically copy pasting all these norms from WTO only, right? So WTO will remain what it is supposed to be, the base organization, establishing the global ground rules for trade, right? But then there will be FTAs and RTAs also, which will add to the WTO norms. But what we find in these RTAs and FTAs is that they are accepting WTO norms as the base norms. So except for market access and tariff negotiations, for other norms, they are just copy pasting what WTO norms are there. Right. Now, what reforms are needed in WTO? One is adjudication process. I've already address. The other is reforms. Reforms is one is those asked by developed countries. Now, what developed countries are asking for is agreement on agriculture where they can go on giving subsidies. Developing countries, I mean, not so much hard and fast divide between developed and developing countries, but some countries who are giving subsidies want to continue their capacity. Other countries want to have agricultural trade also in normal goods trade way only, and they want to cut down the subsidies. So both sides are asking for reforms, and we make sure that reforms, agriculture is something which will remain different or separate from normal goods trade, because industrial goods, because agriculture is one where there is a large amount of investment with much less returns. But it's not like industrial goods and all where returns are much more than investment. So agriculture will always need a special treatment and will remain an exception. But then the problem with less developed countries is that they have to import subsidized agricultural goods, which is sort of killing their agricultural market. One of the reasons why India FTA did not work out was that is what genetically modified foods and sort of import of US agricultural products, which would have hurt our particular agricultural sectors. Now, this is something which developing countries have to stay firm, and they have to put counter reform which wants more for them rather than giving in what powerful countries want. The other might be because see, US does not want WTO to end because they have got, US or developed countries, what they got in 95, they know they won't get in 2025 and 2030, right? So they will be the biggest losers. So they don't want, but they're using it for arm twisting, right? So it's best that we keep our patience and we don't give in to that pressure. Then what they're asking for reform is TRIPS reform. That is, many obligations have to be added which are currently not in TRIPS. So they are pushing these obligations to RTAs and FTAs, TRIPS plus provisions. But it is best that we sort of again resist there. Right. Investment competition is another thing that once in Trump referred to, but competition, I don't think we should get in, but investment we can sort of look out, because international investment law is one area which shows that the dangers of bilateralism, because right now what we have is bilateral investment treaties, but this bilateral investment treaties is hurting the regulatory capacity of the host states. And right now, both developing countries, they want to regain their regulatory powers against foreign investors. So it is best that, if we have a multilateral agreement in a forum like WTO, that may help countries to assert their regulatory powers. Otherwise, every time we take a regulatory action, countries have to pay a lot of compensation to private investors, foreign investors. So that is because this, as it happens, we just sign bilateral investment treaties in our rush to invite foreign investors without taking into account what regulatory implications it will have. And these arbitral tribunals, they are sort of more investor friendly than they are host state friendly. So that is, multilateral rules will help countries. Again, bilateral investment treaties will be there, but as it says, that multilateralism will establish ground rules. Now I'm sort of short of time, so I'll skip many of these things again. Now, what WTO is doing is one thing that is these days when it is not so active in other ways is that it has it is doing a lot of advocacy work and sort of building public opinion. So, like things like women and trade, trade and environment, trade and climate change. So, it is collaborating with other international organizations and doing a lot of advocacy work, which is sort of again strengthening the ground rules on trade. So, I think I have exceeded my time, but what I would just say in conclusion is that we need to moderate our expectations of from WTO. WTO is a multilateral trade organization, and it was never supposed to be the only trade agreement. Right, it will stay there, laying down multilateral rules or ground rules for trade. Right, and on that, with the help and as a reference point, like United Nations is there, does not mean that wars will end. IMF is there, does not mean that, or World Bank is there. That does not mean that monetary violations and money laundering and all these are not happening. Right. These will happen. Same way, WTO is also there as an international organization, laying down ground rules for international trade. But one-to-one trade frictions and trade agreements will continue. And WTO comes, the ground rules as WTO is that it comes as a safeguard when countries are violating those rules, because it is always a reference. And WTO is here to stay because powerful countries, the deal they got in Uruguay round and in GATT, they will not get in future because geopolitical conditions have changed. So the deal they will not get, right? And they know that Trump will also know that he cannot keep on violating, because you can keep on increasing tariff and developing countries will start violating trips, right? So finally it will go back to hurt you only, right? So the thing is, it will remain, but this is, I mean, these type of tiffs or sort of tariff wars or trade wars, whatever we call, these will keep happening, right? And but that ground rules will always be there for some, I think, for a long time, I guess, right? And the best way is that you let it be like that and don't add too many agreements on that, because the reforms that developed countries are talking about is adding more agreements. So it is best that we don't add more agreements to it and let the present agreement, except for investment, I don't think we should add more agreement. But there are some provisions which can be interpreted in a broader manner to include climate and environment and all, which, I mean, existing provisions will help. So that is what it is. Thank you so much for allowing me, for inviting me and letting me share my views. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your enlightening address and your views on the topic. Now, I have the privilege to invite our guest of honor, and simultaneously, I invite the host team, Ms. Sarah Benjamin, to introduce our guest of honor, Professor P. Siri Sudha. Sarah, you may proceed, please.
We are honored to host one of the leading legal academics, Professor Dr. P. Sri Sudha, Professor of Law and Dean at the SRM School of Law, Chennai, under the SRM Institute of Science and Technology. Professor Sri Sudha brings over 2 decades of academic excellence, leadership, and innovation to legal education. She holds both an LLD from the National Law School of India University, Bangalore, and a PhD in law from Andhra University. She has held key academic and administrative roles, and since mid 2024, she has served as the Dean of the School of Law at SRM Institute of Science and Technology, where she continues to enhance the school's academic standing and institutional growth. An accomplished scholar and educator, Professor Sri Sudha's teaching interests span core and emerging fields of law. Beyond classroom instruction, she plays an active role in shaping legal discourse on the future of legal education, including the integration of artificial intelligence and digital learning methodologies, a subject on which she has recently shared valuable perspectives. Through her dual roles as a teacher and leader, she is committed to nurturing the next generation of legal professionals equipped for the challenges of globalization, technological disruption, and multidisciplinary legal practice. Under her deanship, SRM School of Law has undertaken several initiatives to foster academic rigor, industry collaboration, and international engagement. We are fortunate today to benefit from her insights at the intersection of law, education, and innovation. Please join me in extending a warm and enthusiastic welcome to Professor Dr. P. Sri Sudha. We eagerly look forward to her address and the knowledge she will share. Thank you.
Good afternoon, one and all. First of all, Professor Benjamin from Mysore University, organizing committee members, and the panelists who are about to speak on one of the most important issue, that is nothing but WTO at 30 years. So first of all, I congratulate organizing committee for the purpose of selecting one of the most important issue, not only for India, but world at large. Today, the globalization, whether it is a myth or a great opportunity, all those things we have to discuss certain pertinent aspects with regard to the geopolitical trajectory which is prevalent in today's scenario. And moreover, I'm going to discuss few landmark judgments which are delivered by WTO, wherein few cases India is the winner, but very recently, with regard to certain cases, because of lack of proper appointments at appellate body, still we are waiting to receive the outcome. And all those things will be discussed by me. And at the end, I'm going to suggest what are the best possible ways to refine this trajectory in a more developing countries friendly way. I think my presentation is visible to you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So, like I have stated before, the reason behind this crisis is only one thing, that is America first. This is the agenda submitted from the side of Trump's political party. That is the reason why, to satisfy the fellow Americans' sentiment, he has taken the weapon of tariff for the purpose of creating some sort of fear and insecurity at international trade level. So with regard to India's stand before WTO, it is very, very active, and it has crossed around $1,000 trillion turnover with regard to this international trade. And a few sectors, each one of us, we know very well about that because of India's active participation in this international trade only. We are the net winners when with regard to the service sector's contribution for our GDP. But there are other important sectors like sugar, fisheries, and solar panels, and renewable and non-renewable energy sectors have badly affected because of the retaliatory measures from the side of developed countries. And moreover, apart from these 6 to 7 products, 28 products are also subjected to retaliatory tariffs from US, Japan, and other developed countries. And before I'm going to explain the geopolitical scenarios, like Sheila Madam has rightly stated, three important factors. The first one is special and differential treatment, and most favored nation treatment, and access to market. So these three factors are very, very important for the purpose of promotion of international trade of a particular country. That is the reason why it is very, very important to understand what is India's success with regard to the disputes which are filed against India. There are certain important disputes are selected by me so that we will get whether India is the net loser or the winner. So, with regard to the first dispute, that is pertaining to tariff treatment on certain goods. So, this is the dispute between India versus Japan and Europe. So, in this case, very recently, the government of India has taken one important initiative, that is Make in India initiative. So, according to that domestic initiative, it has levied 10% customs duty on mobile phones as well as ICT products which are entering into the portals of India through Japan and few European countries. So, when we have imposed this tariff, they have filed a case before WTO by alleging the fact that this tariff is violating a provision of Information Technology Act. Likewise, by virtue of that dispute, they were so successful for the purpose of entering into the market of India. And after that, one more important dispute, that is measures concerning sugar and sugarcane, wherein we have faced a challenge from Guatemala, Brazil, as well as Australia. So, in this case, these three countries have strongly argued that the Indian government is supporting sugarcane farmers by way of providing less interest percentage loans. They have treated these zero interest loans as subsidies. So, because of these kind of measures from the side of India are badly disrupting the prices of sugar, and that is nothing but breach of trade rules which are enshrined under agreement on agriculture. So, like that, we have faced a very big turmoil in association with the sugar and sugarcane related exports which are going to other parts of the world. And after that, the third important dispute is that it is a dispute between India and US with regard to export related measures. So, in this case also, Government of India has initiated certain trade promotion methods. So, according to that method, if a company is processing certain products in special economic zones, so certain export promotion soaps in the form of certain export duty concessions were given. So these measures, a domestic support was provided to certain industries. This was challenged by Japan, Brazil, Canada, China, EU, as well as Thailand. So, still the outcome of this dispute is pending before WTO because of non-functioning of appellate body. And after that, very recently, Government of India has taken one more initiative, that is with regard to improving this solar panel generated electricity generation. So focus non renewable energies category promotion at domestic level. So this dispute is very much connected with solar cells and solar modules. So here also the US has challenged the subsidies which are given by Government of India for the purpose of improving power generation by way of using this solar panels. So at the time of filing a suit before WTO, from the side of US, they have submitted that. So this is violative of norms of WTO. And after this, one more important case that is with regard to imports of iron and steel products. So wherein Japan is a party. After hearing Japan's contention, few developed countries like Australia, US have joined, and their claim was supported from the side of Indonesia as well as EU. And ultimately, in November 2018, the WTO has upheld the safeguard duty which are imposed by them. Like that, if we examine the nature of disputes, all the 5 disputes are well connected with either subsidies pertaining to agricultural products, as well as renewable energy related issues and information and communication technology related issues, wherein all these 3 sectors are very, very important for the purpose of transformation of India from a developing country to developed country. And after that, equally, India also filed cases against developed countries like US when they have imposed heavy tariffs against India with regard to export of steel as well as aluminium products. So wherein India has challenged the safeguard duties imposed by these countries. And like I have stated before, with regard to renewable energy sector also, there are 10 measures which are imposed by India with regard to renewable energy mission was also challenged before WTO. And after discussing the disputes which are filed by India and against India, we will understand one important reason behind these trade wars is that at global level, United States of America is a place wherein they will import only 11% products. So remaining 89% goods and services, they are the net exporters. So that is the reason why they do not want to lose this dominant position at global level. And moreover, very recently, the China is also competing with the United States of America for the purpose of stopping the dominant position of China before global platforms. US has taken this imposition of tariffs is one of the most powerful tool for the purpose of maintaining the dominant position at global level. And moreover, dear friends, one more important aspect is that so the American middle class people are also not performing well for the purpose of satisfying the needs of these people also. The current government, the US government, has taken these trade wars as one of the most potential tool for the purpose of playing with these kind of trade access facilities from the side of developing countries. And moreover, if you look at the functioning of Trump government also, so every time the political philosophy behind his actions is gaining popularity at a geopolitical scenario. So that is the reason why this trade war is a very, very important from Indian point of view. And first of all, what are the implications for a developing country like India with regard to this kind of retaliatory measures from the side of US. The first principle in international trade law is non-discrimination, but because of unilateral imposition of tariffs without providing a fair and equitable opportunity to the developing countries, it straight away violates the equal opportunity of a developing country. So, which is against to the well-established principles of WTO. So that is the reason why, being a global leader like United States of America, so it will lose its respect before global forums. And with regard to the percentage of tariffs and the kind of purchases and the imports which are done by United States of America from the year 2000 to 2003 is this graphic is very, very important for us. The percentage of US imports are in stark decline, whereas the remaining part of the world, we people are dependent on the products which are coming from United States of America, which means the balancing factor, the trade, the net trade gainer is the United States of America. And for the purpose of addressing this kind of trade disruptive practices like unilateral imposition of tariffs, there are certain important solutions I intend to suggest from the scholars' opinion. That is, one important thing is that even though US is not very active in all the trade negotiations, by way of utilizing its veto power, it is controlling the state of affairs at WTO. So first of all, this non-participant veto should be withdrawn at WTO level. And one more important thing is that from past 3 years, this WTO's appellate body is not functioning properly. So immediately, if we can restore the situation by way of appointing a proper judicial officers, so we can address this problem in a more effective way. And after that, there are certain governance factors also we should examine at WTO. Like World Bank and IMF, we are not having a proper governance system. So the governance of WTO will be monitored as well as controlled by ministerial conference through a proper voting system. But if we introduce such kind of stable governance system by way of appointing a strong leadership before WTO, we can improve the governance patterns at WTO. So like that, these three factors, if we infuse in the WTO system, I'm very positive in such a way that we can control the dominance from the side of you. And after that, like Sheila ma'am has rightly explained, the agreement on agriculture as well as the subsidy to agricultural products is also one important issue from Indian point of view. Because in India, the government is supporting the sugar, wheat, as well as rice for the purpose of providing the basic support to the people who are not in a position to procure these things for their day-to-day purpose. Food security purpose only subsidies. But whereas at developed countries, there are four important subsidies are very, very popular. So amber subsidies, blue, green, as well as development subsidies. So when it comes to the subsidies which are provided from the side of Government of India, they falls under the development. As in India, the percentage of poor people are more, the government is providing minimum support to certain agricultural products. And moreover, for national food security purposes also, we are storing large scale of food grains in India. So that is the reason why this agricultural subsidies classification needs to be revisited. And moreover, if we examine the situation with regard to agreement on agriculture, the developing countries, around 30% GDP is dependent on agriculture, but at developed countries, 3% will be catered by agriculture. And moreover, this aspect is very, very important. So the developed countries will do this farming for a commercial purpose, for the purpose of earning money. It is a part of their commerce, but whereas for developing countries as well as least developed countries, agriculture is the way of life. So that is the reason why, for the purpose of ensuring a level playing field with regard to agriculture, also certain reforms needs to be done at various ministerial conference agenda. And moreover, the current unilateral tariffs are straightaway violating Article 28, which explicitly prohibits unilateral tariff increases, and Article 1 also specifically talks about non-binding discrimination. And moreover, Article 21 also talks about for security purposes also the tariffs can be imposed, but from the side of United States of America, they're not suffering from this kind of serious situations. In fact, they're in a very comfortable position. They are experiencing the trade deficit. So that's why this unilateral tariff imposition is affecting the growth trajectory of developing as well as least developing countries. And apart from this, I'm going to suggest few short-term solutions also for the purpose of improving the current crisis. That is reinforcing one important dialogue before multilateral forums in such a way that trade is a mutual benefit. Trade can never be treated as a zero-sum game. So, because of US way of imposition of unilateral tariff imposition is creating imbalance at global level. And one more important thing in such a way that because of America is the strong net exporter of technology also. They are very, very strong when it comes to service sector. So because of that dominance also, it is adding additional cost to developing and least developing countries. And after discussing these short-term remedies also, it is very, very important to discuss about certain long-term solutions in such a way that developing countries should focus on regional trade agreements. Unfortunately, these agreements are not working in a more effective way. And after this, it is very, very important to discuss about how these unilateral tariffs are affecting the GDP of developing countries. So, if the current situation continues, there is a likely chance of reduction of GDP growth in developing countries, and moreover, the scale of lowering the GDP may decrease relatively for around 5.1 countries below the line of status quo baseline. And after this, these tariffs will give a very, very negative impact to the products which are coming from developed countries. We cannot expect a stable price mechanism. India being a economy every time it is facing the challenges from non-market economy like China. So in return to that, it creates less income to the developing as well as least developed countries. And according to the popular economists like Lars Brink as well as David Alden, they have suggested certain important solutions like Sheila ma'am has rightly stated. The WTO rules are not consistent. So certain rules are basically favoring the developed countries. That is the reason why at the time of interpretation of a particular provision, a level playing field needs to be ensured. And like I have stated before, with regard to the agreement on agriculture as well as subsidies which are given by Government of India, for what purpose the government is providing the support, there are certain particular measures needs to be calculated for examining the effect of these subsidies against various products. And after this, there is an absolute need to modify certain agreements of WTO to protect this biodiversity as well as encourage biosecurity as well as for the purpose of maintaining the resilience pertaining to climate change scenarios. So I agree with Sheila ma'am. Instead of increasing the number of WTO agreements, so we have to amend as well as we have to include certain important provisions which are responsible for the purpose of addressing the climate change related issues. And moreover, it is very, very important to demark the needs of developing countries as well as least developed countries. So, if a particular country is providing subsidy or any kind of governmental support to improve the infrastructure of a particular country, so the standards should be redefined. So the WTO should support the developmental policies of the developing countries rather than taking retaliatory measures in the form of unilateral tariffs. So after discussing the reasons behind the current geopolitical trajectory in the form of unilateral tariff imposition from the side of US, I intend to end this talk by way of stating one important statement from Mr. Nelson Mandela at the time of addressing WTO. What did he say is, as we celebrate what has been achieved in shaping the world trading system, let us resolve to leave no stone unturned in working together to ensure that our shared principles are everywhere translated into reality. So that is the reason why ensuring level playing field between developed and developing countries should be the need of the hour. Then only we can achieve the core objectives of that WTO. That is nothing but level playing field between developed, developing as well as least developed countries. With the help of trade only, we can achieve a holistic development and transformation of countries from developing to developed country. So finally, I thank organizing committee for providing a wonderful opportunity to share few aspects pertaining to what is going on at WTO and its implications on India.
Thank you, Professor, for your sharing insight, values, and valuable talks on this topic. Now we move to the keynote address. I invite Ms. Sarah Benjamin to introduce once again Professor Srinivas Loines, Professor of Law. And I should take that disclaimer. This topic was suggested by Professor Srinivas Loines. So he is also playing a role in this webinar. Sarah, you may proceed.
It is a matter of great honor and privilege to welcome a truly distinguished academician and legal scholar to today's session, Professor Dr. Srinivasulu NS, currently serving as Professor of Law at the National University of Juridical Sciences, Kolkata. Professor Srinivasulu is a widely respected figure in both national and international academic circles. He is a distinguished member of the International Council of Jurists London and a scientific member of the Canadian Institute for International Law, Ontario, Canada. He is also affiliated with the World Commission for Human Rights London, reflecting his global commitment to advancing the rule of law and human rights. Beyond academia, Professor Srinivasulu has played a pivotal role in shaping public policy. He has worked with various ministries under the Government of India, including the Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Human Resource Development, and Ministry of Transport, as well as with the University Grants Commission. Professor Srinivasulu's blend of deep academic scholarship and practical policy engagement makes him a rare and valuable resource in the field of legal education. His insights are bound to enrich our understanding and inspire meaningful dialogue among us. Please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Professor Dr. Srinivasulu NS. Thank you.
Sir, are you there? Unmute. Okay, fine. Unmute.
Good afternoon,
Yes, good afternoon. Yes, sir, we can hear you.
respected Professor Benjamin, Professor Sheila Roy, Professor Sridhuta, Professor Tilottama Rai Chaudhary, Professor Sudesh, and my young friends Ashim and Sarah. We are already 25 minutes behind the schedule, so I'll try to keep myself a little shorter. Since, as Hashim mentioned, that it is the topic that I suggested, irrespective of the current condition that myself is in, I thought of pitching in and contributing in whatever way possible. I'm one among those people who are criticizers of WTO. That is because it is completely one-handedly orchestrated by USA. I don't even add UK, France, such other European countries. You may be surprised that the formulation of WTO took almost 50 years. 1947, it got initiated, it ended in 1994. In fact, in 1992, between 92 to 94, nobody was actually thinking that within 2-3 years, WTO will get rolled down. Those 2-3 years, in fact, most of the work got done. That is because in 1991, Cold War ended between Russia and USA. Russia got divided into a number of countries. Russia's economy started fading away. Russia became weak. Until then, Russia and USA used to be the two top guns, and the USA would have feared those countries, those part of the world who are supporters of Russia, and Russia would have done the same with respect to USA. So when Russia lost its strength, both the political and economic, quickly USA pressurized to implement Dunkel proposal, which turned into the ultimate text of WTO, comprising of more than 20 international treaties. That indicates how the beginning of WTO itself is based upon geopolitical scenario, which was prevalent at that particular point of time. Though Russia was more or less equivalent to USA during that time, Russia never dreamt of controlling the entire world. But USA has been trying to do that since 1947. That is because USA's economy is almost equivalent to 100 countries' economy. If there are 200 countries in this world, USA's economy at that point of time was almost equivalent to 100 countries' economy. So they wanted to take control of entire world. There is a saying in Telugu, somebody who is having political power, somebody who is having economic power will not listen to anybody. And also, he or she will not accept to listen to people saying no. This quote or this saying exactly got implemented by USA through WTO. I'm saying this because all of a sudden, those poor nations, in particular Southeast Asia or African nations, who are struggling to feed their populace, they were forced to accept foreign goods. They were forced to purchase foreign medicine, foreign agrarian products. Whether you have foreign exchange to pay them off, being the government of any particular country, whether you are having foreign exchange to pay them off or not, doesn't matter, you will have to accept. That means you are becoming indebted to, say, big nations like USA, Canada, UK, and all that. So this is the beginning of WTO. They made poor countries to be under the debt of these big giant nations. Even in case of India also, India may not be that poor country, especially now, but during 95, when WTO came into being, India signed it in April 94 and January 95 it came into being. For the least developed countries, in particular African countries, it came into being in 2005. Even in the as per the Indian scenario also, during 90s, 95 to 99, India was not completely ready to accept or to implement WTO and associated agreements. USA, Canada, Brazil, UK filed a case before WTO dispute settlement machinery. WTO dispute settlement machinery came out with a decision directing the government to immediately implement WTO, in particular the IPR agreement, trade-related aspects of intellectual property agreement, TRIPS agreement. That's the reason why, if you look at the history of Indian IP lawmaking, between 1999 to 2001, we brought in number of legislations. That is because in 99, WTO dispute settlement machinery gave a direction to India based upon the complaint that these countries formally or informally made to WTO dispute settlement machinery. But when it comes to any other complaint that the WTO had to adjudicate, that complaint may be between USA and UK, USA and European Union, USA and China, things like that, stuff like that. WTO never decided any, dispute settlement body never took any decision. I can quote a couple of cases also with this in this regard. In the case of beef hormones, which is a case between USA and European Union, when European Union imposed a moratorium against the USA's exported beef, USA filed case against Europe before WTO. WTO did not take any decision. It went on for a while, 6 months, 1 year, 1.5 years. Then aftermath of that, the WTO said, the dispute settlement body, that you guys sit together and settle. Same thing happened between USA, Canada, and Brazil versus European Union in the European Union biotech case as well. in the year 2005. That beef hormone was 95, this is 2005. Once again, WTO settlement body did not take any decision. Why I am bringing these two case laws? The reason is, when it comes to big nations, your WTO dispute settlement body is not taking decisions. But when it comes to underdeveloped or developing nations like India, it will give a direction. Whether it is written in the charter of a WTO. So somebody who is having, as I said, political power, economic power, will ensure that whichever body it is, they pass the decree, judgment, or whatever in their favor. This is number one, why WTO is not fine, is not fair, and whatever is happening now, that WTO has become redundant, obsolete, and people started looking beyond WTO and stuff like that. There is another reason why WTO is fading away now. Probably USA never thought in the beginning of 90s, when they pressurized the entire world to be amenable to them through this agreement, that nations will pick up this fast, especially China. It is now number 2 in the world economy, only next to USA, Japan and Germany, then India, number 4 or 5, right? So USA never thought that not only these countries, number of countries are coming up in improving their economy. And when the same rule applies to them also. Now China doesn't bother about anybody. China doesn't bother about USA at all. They had even that attitude in the sense that they never signed WTO till 2005. Because they were also very strong internally. They knew that their economy will grow sooner or later. That's why they did not bother much about it. Nevertheless, the WTO that is in place now started fading away from 2005 itself. That is because the example that I gave you, the working of a dispute settlement body, the impact that it is having on the least developed and developing nations, in the sense, the money, whatever you have to pay to the exporters, and you are unable to feed your populace. You are unable to improve your R&D, right? This kind of provisions or this kind of mandates, they may be economically okay because no investor for that matter would like to lose their revenue. But your investor coming to my country and trying to invest money and taking revenue from my country, that may not be acceptable to me. And you reducing my country to be the consumer market, that may not be acceptable for me. You are a big country, technologically sound. You are able to produce a number of goods that the entire world would like to purchase or would like to see. You are dumping all those goods into all the member nations. Of course, we have anti-dumping agreement also under the same WTO, but it is more or less dead. So what happens when you are getting goods from elsewhere? Your R&D will die. You will become your mindset will become like that. Now it will come tomorrow from there. Why should I work? And all your money will go for that exporter or whoever. It will make the country slave. And your forex resource, financial resource will dry out. And you will be under serious mandate to do something which you don't like to. Every nation for that matter, every continent for that matter, will have its own system, its own culture, its own tradition, its own way out in living and in surviving. Like European Union is always proud of its typical culture, tradition, and all, whatever may be the reason. But when this globalization WTO came into being, it's a serious hit on the system that respective nations are having within on their own, the culture, tradition that they're having within on their own. Because when you are producing certain goods based upon the culture and tradition that you have imbibed, that you have gathered from your previous generations, when you are getting goods from elsewhere, when you are mandated to get goods from elsewhere, these goods will not get market. Because you have a mandate, you are left without any choice to purchase them. And because the market is coming down for the traditional goods, that the traditional producer will become weak, that the traditional knowledge-based industry will become more or less extinguished. These things happened aftermath of 95 when globalization or even WTO came into being. And that's why I said from 2005 onwards, people started talking about globalization. Instead of globalization, localization. Now, what is happening in 2025? I'll quote two examples. India signed a free trade agreement with the UK, and India is going to sign free trade agreement with the USA. That's very surprising because USA orchestrated this globalization WTO, where it has incorporated most favored nation treatment, national treatment. It says that you should not treat anybody specially. You should not be in favor of any other country. If you are giving any favor to one country, that favor should be given to all the other countries and all that. That's the basic fabric of a basic principle of your WTO. Now, these free trade agreements are actually against that principle. There may be exceptions, but exceptions cannot eat away the general rule. Now, this free trade agreement very recently government of India signed with the UK, and soon India is signing a similar one with the USA, where USA itself is getting into that agreement with India in particular. That's a very surprising, and that is the more or less beginning of the end of WTO, because with a country like India, which is the fastest growing economy, now more or less we are in the third position after China. USA signed a number of such free trade agreements with China. Now they started with India. So USA wants to cut a deal with China and India because these two are the fast growing economies. And for that reason, they are ready to forgo all those basic principles or basic fabric of WTO. Then USA itself is doing it. UK, Canada, Brazil, all those nations which were up and ante against entire world between 95 to 2005 to get the WTO agreements fast executed at their local levels. Now all those nations are trying to sign free trade agreements with all those nations which are fast growing economies. So that's why I said USA would have never thought 30 years back that these nations will grow this quickly, and it has to sign free trade agreements with all these growing economies. Remember, these nations, it could be China, it could be India, or whichever nation which is fast growing, that growth is not because of WTO. That growth is because of the way they handled their local resources, the way they handled their local system, the way they nurtured their human resources. No contribution from WTO framework whatsoever. That's why I say WTO framework is only to make entire world into consumer market with 2, 3, 4 countries trying to be the producers and selling their goods. Such is the scenario, and that's the reason why now nations are going for free trade agreements, to which India is also becoming party. And as I said, the end of WTO has started. This is the beginning of the end of WTO. With these few words, I would stop here, and I would thank the organizers and the audience for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your support and your valuable thoughts on the topic. We shall move to the next speaker. Now, I ask Ms. Sarah Benjamin to introduce Professor Tilutama Raichaudhuri, Professor of Law, National Law, University of Juridical Science, Kolkata.
Today, we are honored to host one of India's leading experts in competition law, Professor Dr. Tilotama Raichaudhuri, Professor of Law at National University of Juridical Sciences, Kolkata. Professor Raichaudhuri's academic journey is exemplary. She earned her MPhil in International Trade Law and a PhD in Competition Law from the National Law School of India University, Bangalore, where her research focused on regulating vertical agreements, a topic of crucial importance in the heart of competition jurisprudence. Since joining the National University of Juridical Sciences, she has established herself as a prominent scholar and educator, bringing clarity and rigor to the study of competition law, trade law, and regulatory policy. In addition to her teaching responsibilities, she serves as the director of the university's Center for Competition Law and Policy, playing a leading role in fostering research, discussion, and thought leadership in this vital field. Professor Raichaudhuri is also a member of the Network of Competition Experts India, a national platform that contributes to public discussion and policy making on competition law and market regulation. Her scholarly works have been widely published in reputable journals covering topics such as vertical restraints, abuse of dominance, antitrust compliance, and the intersection of competition law with international trade. Her contributions continually inform both academic debate and practical policy making. Through her dual roles as educator and thought leader, Professor Ray Chowdhury is shaping discourse on competition law in India and beyond. We are privileged to benefit from her academic insight and clarity of thought today. Please join me in extending a warm and enthusiastic welcome to Professor Dr. Tilotama Ray Chowdhury. We look forward to the valuable perspectives she will share with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Okay, I would like to thank the University of Mysore, the organizer, the panelists, everyone for inviting me here. I am happy, I'm privileged to be part of this webinar. And so since a lot, my bandwidth is a little low, which is why I have kept my video off. I hope that's okay.
That's fine.
Right. So since we've had a lot of discussions on the WTO and, the challenges we are facing today, particularly the panelists before me have spoken about specific cases and, what are the recommendations which would be given. I was wondering how I could contribute to this webinar by, stressing upon some basic principles, as well as, kind of thinking that we know what the WTO is about today, the challenges it entails, but what could be realistically the possible solutions, or do we even really want solutions to what exists? So apart from the WTO, at this juncture in 2025, we could question a lot of the post-war developments, starting with even the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which we've signed. Because if we see the world around us and the kind of geopolitics, the kind of events which are taking place, you would wonder whether it's not just the WTO and during COVID, the WHO, but you would wonder whether a lot of these international institutions created after the war really serve their purpose today. Now, having said that, it's all right, and I believe this as an academician, it's all right to criticize. The panelists before me have given in-depth, analysis of what WTO's successes could be and its failures. Professor Srinivasalu, the previous speaker, in fact, has highlighted particular cases where we were subjected to dominance and, arm twisting from economies such as the US. But before I go on to whether WTO as an institution has any relevance today, whether trade as we know today is trade as we envisaged when the WTO was created many years back. Before I go into that, I would just start with, the basic principles of why we needed to have this system. Now, the basic principles of having any kind of international trading system has to be fairness, non-discrimination, transparency, predictability. And today, a lot of these criticisms of Trump, which are happening, is because some of his policies are negating these basic principles, particularly predictability. Now, I will not, since I am, speaking much later, as I said, I'm not going to take up much time on this. But what are the basic principles on which we created this trading system? Why did we even need it? So we are aware of the fact that, the first thing the WTO is going to, encourage is the MFN treatment, that we have to grant the same trade advantages such as lower tariffs to all member countries. National treatment. Then that once the goods or services are imported, they must be treated no less favorably than your domestic produced goods or services. So this is just to ensure that there's a level playing field and there is fairness and transparency in your market vis-a-vis all nations. Apart from that, we have core principles of reciprocity, predictability, and the fact that WTO agreement will be a binding and enforceable commitment. We also have on paper, and we have, it's not that today I'm saying on paper, but we also have clauses for special and differential treatment to developing countries that, the WTO recognizes that developing countries may need some special consideration, flexibility in trade agreements. And most of all, we also created a dispute settlement mechanism. Of course, as Sheila ma'am pointed out, the dispute settlement mechanism is far from perfect regarding constitution of the panel and the appellate body. Again, of course, there is dominance of the US, and the US has successfully been blocking the working of the dispute system. But nevertheless, we created a trade system at the time, and this is also very important to know, that today when we are speaking of WTO and the kind of condition it is in 1948, when GATT, the first multilateral trading system came into being, the trading world was even in a far worse condition. So we had economies like Europe and Japan, which were in ruins. We had China, East Europe, Russia, which also were, just trying to recover from war. The global South was just emerging in a, heavily dominated colonial system. So at least at that point, we understood that, without creating such a rule-based system through global economic integration, economic progress cannot be made. So essentially, what I'm trying to say is that at least at that point of time, we decided to create this kind of system. Now, when we create a system after the war, and then finally we look at the agreements which are entered into following the Uruguay round. I'm not going into a lot of details, but essentially, if we look at the timeline, a body which has been created so many years ago, naturally today will not, a lot of other, not only geopolitics, maybe many other revisions will be required in the treaty itself. So I wouldn't be so hard on, criticizing the WTO right at this beginning. But very quickly, let me first go through the achievements. So after creation of the WTO, of course, we did have significant tariff reductions globally. And many countries became members with commitments to have open markets. We did have a dispute settlement body which functioned effectively for quite a few years, till deadlocks which happened later. Then after that, the main challenges which happened and which have been discussed by the previous speakers are that if you have any kind of system which operates by consensus, priorities can differ between developed and developing nations. So this consensus itself is not something which is easy to achieve. Again, when you have clauses like the special and differential treatment clauses, major economies like the US can sometimes they can say that countries like China, India, etc. They don't require this kind of treatment, and we need so developing countries will not have access to those flexibilities. There will be allegations, there have been allegations as submitted by Professor Srinivasalu before me of bias in terms of settlement of disputes. Bias in least developed small nations often are struggling to enforce, their priorities. And there is this perception of the power is always in balance of the richer nations. Now, since 2019, the appellate body has virtually been paralyzed, and we know from the recent disputes, and this is more or less a direct result of the US blockages. And disputes are not solved. So, in short, what I'm trying to say is we have also seen the rise of protectionism in the Trump era being a prime example of protectionism with all the tariffs which President Donald Trump imposed starting from 2018, and they're escalating even today. When you open the papers, you see that this is the current 25% on Indian exports, up to 145 on Chinese goods, etc. Now Trump is criticizing WTO as unfair to the US interests. And Trump's tariffs now have been criticized that, what is the point of having this kind of system, a multilateral system, if developed nations, particularly US, can literally threaten an arm twist like this. Again, Trump is using the security exception clause, which is also invoking a lot of debate. Now, the point is, where are we going from here? Before I move on to any other points of criticism or tariffs or protectionism, the first thing which we have to understand is, like I said, WTO was created on certain principles. It is important to create those principles if you want to have free trade in the world. If you want to have trade, relatively free trade, you have to lower barriers, you have to cooperate, it has to be on the principle of reciprocity. Now, the thing is that, it's almost like the spinning of the wheel, in the sense that with this recent protectionism, tariff wars, we are actually going back to a system where a multilateral treaty is not being given much importance. Now, what are people doing? A large chunk of the world are praying that this is just for 3 years. Trump goes and this ends. Academicians are saying that, this is just the writing on the wall. WTO had a lot of weaknesses, and it is not something which is practically going to work. But as Sheila ma'am pointed out, at least it's an umbrella. So within that larger umbrella, and I don't know, because there is a lack of time today, and this is a webinar on trade law, it's almost like if you could equate the WTO system with Fuller's morality of aspiration. So if we have those highest ideals of world trade at the umbrella level, we could at least work out laws which operate as moralities of duty. That is the basic systems necessary. So while WTO may seem very aspirational now, whatever other treaty, even bilateral treaties we are entering into, are basically borrowing from the principles laid down in the WTO. So the same principle of reciprocity, the same principles of fairness are being embedded in bilateral treaties. So basically, one is, we can say that, Trump's tariff plans mark the beginning of of a new kind of trade policy and a departure from the WTO. Now, there is another school of thought which says that this is going to be temporary because essentially what happens is that it's not just Trump doing this. Why is the world agreeing to this arrangement? Now, some countries, so if a country sees other countries agreeing to similar tariff levels and their economies are competitive in the same sectors, like Europe, South Korea, Japan, then if they accept the same baseline tariff rate as those other countries, it's not a problem for them. Now, other reasons will include that, if the US importers will pay the new tariff rates. So if US wants to tax itself also in this way, and my country is not getting a different rate from others, so be it. So it depends on how the country is placed and what are the exports and what are the sectors. Now, there are other countries. The larger section is that, we can't afford to get into a war or an escalation like China did. Let's just kind of compromise or, kind of guarantee some investments in the US and just wait this period out. So if people wait and, there are investment treaties which are being worked out for 3 years so that this period is kind of, we tide over this period. So Trump has struck a number of deals involving, let's say, 3-year investment commitments. The larger economic angle, which researchers at Oxford, they are predicting that, these measures they are detrimental to global trade and they could lower the global GDP growth to below 2%. And this would be a very, very, it would almost be a crisis situation, just a little better than the pandemic. So the point I'm trying to make is this is not a situation which will go on. It is bound to end. And so I'm not going into what are the specific reforms, because the point I'm trying to make is that, other speakers have spoken of the reforms. And secondly, there are various changes which are listed. But are these changes realistically possible? Of course, we know that we want to restore the dispute settlement mechanism. We want to make it stronger for nations which are not, for developing nations. We could, as suggested by a previous speaker, revise the WTO essential security exception so that, it can't be misused. We can restore the balance between trade liberalization and trade remedies. We could look at a more effective governance of the organization, which I think another speaker just spoke of, that we should look at a structure similar to, the World Bank. This is already, and the kind of leadership we need, the kind of funding. But what I'm trying to say is that if global politics, geopolitics is changing the way it is, these suggestions being made are not new. These suggestions are there. The point is this feasible? All the suggestions which have been given in the wake of the real world today, which makes me go back right to the beginning, we can question human rights treaties too. Does that mean that we should not be a party to them? Similarly, we can criticize the WTO as saying that, yes, it is a system, a multilateral system, it's not fair, and US arm twists, US is imposing tariffs. But we would be going a bit far to say that it's a complete failure, because we have to have certain rules in place. And so whatever reforms we suggest today will really not be feasible unless people decide that in accepting these terms, their own interests will be protected. Nobody here will do anything for the good of the other. So the way things are going, again, there will be a time, because already European Union is indulging in this dual system. They are entering into many, many other treaties. There are ways of bypassing the US. So if multilateralism is not working, there are other modes which we will resort to temporarily. then again, if it is kind of lowering the growth for everybody, we may decide it is better to stick to WTO rules. And only at that point that we decide in our interest that we decide to stick to rules, will we have the possibility of enforcing any of the recommendations which have been suggested. Till that point, we simply have to wait. So this is all I have to say. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity here to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your thoughtful speech on the topic. Now we shall move to the last distinguished speaker. I invite my colleague, Ms. Sarah Benjamin, to introduce Professor Dr. Sudesh, Dean Faculty of Law, Chairman, Department of Studies in Law, University of Bangalore.
It is my distinct honor to introduce one of the most distinguished figures in Indian legal academia, Professor Dr. V. Sudesh, Dean, Faculty of Law, University Law College and Department of Studies in Law, Bangalore University. Professor Sudesh is an alumnus of Bangalore University, where he completed his BAL LLB in 1991 and his LLM in 1993 from University Law College and Department of Studies in Law. He practiced law for several years before pursuing his doctoral research in labor law under the mentorship of the esteemed professor Dr. V.B. Coutinho. He was awarded his PhD in 2005. With over 3 decades of teaching and research experience, Professor Sudesh has made remarkable contributions to legal education in India. His academic interests span labor law, intellectual property law, and jurisprudence, and he has guided 11 PhD scholars to successful completion. His professional journey includes key leadership roles. He has served as the officiating Vice Chancellor of Bangalore University, Dean Faculty of Law, Chairman and Principal of the University Law College, and is currently a Senior Professor of Law. In addition, he is the General Secretary of the University Law College Alumni Association. Professor Sudesh has also contributed to public policy as an ex officio member of the Karnataka State Law Commission and has successfully completed numerous research projects. He is a life member of several prestigious institutions, including the Indian Law Institute, the Indian Social Science Congress, the Karnataka section of the International Commission of Jurists, and the Asian Association of Law Professors. He is a seasoned academic, a prolific writer, and a sought after resource person, having presented at numerous national and international conferences and delivered lectures for UGC, Human Resource Development Center, and various universities across the country. Today, we are privileged to have with us legal scholar whose career reflects excellence in teaching, leadership, and research. Please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Professor Dr. V. Sudesh. We eagerly look forward to his address and the insights he will share with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I am audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yeah. Professor Dr. M.S. Benjamin, Dean Faculty of Law, Chairman and Professor of Law, Department of Studies in Law, University of Mysore. Professor Dr. Sheila Rai, the Chief Guest. Professor P. Sri Sudha, Professor of Law, the Guest of Honor. My good friend, Professor Dr. Srinivas Luenis, who has given the theme for this international webinar and the keynote speaker for the day. Professor Dr. Tilottama Rai Chaudhary, Professor of Law, NUJS Kolkata, and dear students who are present in this online presentation. As the last speaker for the day, I think I'm relieved because all the speakers so far have covered the entire topic. My job is very easy by just to summarize what has been discussed so far and to give my own insights into the ongoing debate. Appropriately, I think the title would be WTO, its existential challenges. We started from the first speaker, Professor Sheila, who said that despite the ongoing differences between the developing nations, least developed nations, and the geopolitical happenings, still the WTO exists as an umbrella organization. Later on, Professor Sudha highlighted how, through its dispute settlement system, major disputes have been resolved, and that shows to a great extent how WTO has successfully maintained the trade balance so that countries do not go to war again on trade. We had the worst experience in the World War I and II. Later on, Professor Srinivaslu, very pessimistic, I think, and very rightly so. So he said, this is a death knell of WTO. He brought out the imbalances of how the parties within the WTO are so uncompromising, whether it is US, UK, Canada, or European Union on the one side, and India and other least developing nations on the other side. How the conflicts within the WTO, the conflicts on negotiation, the conflicts or the disagreement on the dispute settlement process, the appellate body crisis itself has made WTO irrelevant or will be made irrelevant in course of time. Now let me now just very briefly, I understand that I shall not be repeating things. In this context and in the context of the latest tariff war, as we may call, imposed by our great Trump 2.0, how India could face the challenge, meet the challenge. India also has been party to several disputes raised by US and other countries at the WTO and faced its own challenges. What is the present landscape of India? I mean, the trade landscape of India in the context of the tariff imposed, and how India is going to look at this entire geopolitical problems that are arising. Just a matter of history, all of us know that since the 1991 reforms, India's trade has undergone significant transformations. And much has also changed over the past several years, past decade at least. In the past 10 years, with the country experiencing major economic shifts. And these were because of the wider global events such as the COVID-19 pandemic and the ongoing Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine since 2022. And that actually puts into a problem because that is what the time that we got oil from Russia, and that's the major concern for Trump's tariff of 25%. Exports are on the rise. The figures say so that India's merchandise exports increased from 314 billion US in 2013-14 to 451 billion in 2022-23. Roughly, that is growing at an average of 5% annually. Imports have grown at an even faster annual pace. Indian imports grew by 7% annually over the past decade, rising from 450 billion US in 2013-14 to 716 billion in 2023. So this is what the current landscape of India. The question now is, how is India's approach to trade agreements in global economic relations? We have, of course, moved from protectionist to liberalization, as all of us know now, as international trade students. So India's journey with respect to signing of international trade agreements has been a combination of strategic shifts and evolving economic narratives. That's very clear. And all of us know to date, at least, India has signed around, they say, literature says, around 13 regional or free trade agreements, FTAs, all differing in their nature and scope. The partners, of course, include Japan, South Korea, Sri Lanka, along with ASEAN and more recently Australia, and of course UAE, and very recently, just a week ago, with United Kingdom. So India's focus has traditionally been on the Eastern Front. This has changed in recent times as the country is pushing to sign more agreements with countries in the West. In addition to the free trade agreements, India has signed preferential trade agreements with regional such as Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, etc. So the initial agreements such as the South Asian Free Trade Area and the ASEAN-India FTA, these were executed with the objective of fulfilling these untapped markets. But India was faced with limited success in this regard, especially in the case of Japan, South Korea. Therefore, these experiences pushed India to recalibrate its approach to signing FTAs. As a result, India was more cautious about signing FTA in the 2010s, but in recent years, Indian policymakers have renewed their focus on negotiating comprehensive deals with developed world, with Australia, UAE, and other big partners. So given India's past experiences, policymakers were extremely careful with respect to the clauses that included in the latest round of trade agreements. For example, the India-UAE agreement, that is CEPA, Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, has stringent product-specific rules of origin, where the partner country's goods should have at least 40% domestic value content. This was done to prevent the third-party goods routed through the partnered country from getting preferential treatment. So we import from, say, from Bangladesh or some other country and route it through India to UAE, or UAE does the same thing to us. So therefore, the rule 40% domestic value content. And so that what I'm trying to impress upon is that our agreements, bilateral agreements, are now being retwined, retuned to meet the latest globalized challenges. Currently, of course, India is negotiating trade agreements with European Union and UK we have just concluded. Nevertheless, India's recent approach to exploring potential economic agreements with the West marks a new chapter in its trade policy. Now, the question is, how is India addressing its trade challenges and capitalizing on new opportunities? In terms of its the trade landscape, India has potential on the global stage. We are now the fourth biggest growing economy. But the country is currently navigating a range of challenges and opportunities that will significantly affect its influence on global commerce in the context of what Trump has done. Our importing of oil, power, energy from Russia is going to get affected because that fueled our economy. That gave various byproducts, petroleum byproduct that we could export. And that was on the increasing list. So the path to globalization is not entirely straight. That's what I wanted to conclude. Now, as India progresses towards making a mark on the global trade stage, the future holds a blend of ambitious targets and transformative policy that could redefine the country's economic landscape. And today, we are faced with the challenge because of the Trump's 25% tariff. Some of the themes central to the free foreign trade policy include, which was announced 2023, include streamlining processes, improving the ease of doing business, and focusing on emerging issues like areas like e-commerce and high-end technologies. The free trade policy promises process re-engineering and automation for a more seamless trade experience and acknowledge the importance of e-commerce exports. In contrast with the post-independence protectionist era, which mostly focused on high tariffs and trade barriers for import substitution, the present scheme encourages modern and competitive manufacturing sectors. Overall, as India moves towards its ambitious trade objectives, The road ahead has both opportunities and challenges. The integration of market-friendly policy and innovative solutions in various sectors offers a promising path for growth and market expansion. That could receive a little setback with what has happened recently. Because I'll come to that latest tariff impact on how India will now be at a lesser competitive edge with some of the smaller countries. But this also demands a cautious approach with respect to addressing infrastructural gaps and adapting to the evolving global economic climate. The country's role on the global stage looks set to grow and expand, but by how much is partly in the hands of the policymakers, especially again I'm re-emphasizing in the context of the tariff that are imposed. Now, what are the problems in the latest tariff war that is going on imposed by Trump? Electronics and technology, pharmaceuticals, gems and jewelry, textiles and apparels. These are some of the four leading export areas, manufacturing areas where we may suffer. It is there in the public domain now. So the 25% tariff on India places the country at a competitive disadvantage. Mark my words, at a competitive disadvantage compared to regional peers who have negotiated terms. Japan and the European Union faces only 15% tariff. South Korea secured a 15% rate. Indonesia faces 19%, Vietnam 20%. Especially in the garment sector, we are going to suffer. This disparity threatens to divert orders to countries, undermining India's export competitiveness. Yes, many consider that US was justified, as Tilottama madam pointed out, by implementing the national security clause. The US justifies these tariffs under presidential authorities, including Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, the National Security Section 301 of the Trade Act, and the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The invocation of national security exception under WTO rules remains contentious, with the US arguing for interpretation while critics point out to violation of multilateral trading principles. India, of course, has reserved its right to impose retaliatory duties under WTO norms and has challenged the US tariffs on steel and aluminium under Section 232. However, as already demonstrated, the paralysis of the WTO's appellate body limits the effectiveness of multilateral dispute resolution mechanism. So India's trade landscape with the United States, the trading partner, the United States stands as India's largest trading partner, though, with bilateral trade reaching, figure says, up to 131.84 billion US dollars in 24-25. But still there is a deficit. Both countries seek to more than double bilateral trade by 2030 and negotiate a multilateral agreement, bilateral trade agreement. So we have to await Indian response. Now, what is the reaction of the government as officially known? That there will be a measured response emphasizing continuing diplomatic engagement. And we have been doing this to protect, our need is to protect our own domestic sector, especially agriculture sector, the dairy sector, the local indigenous solar manufacturing sector, etc. The micro, medium enterprises sector. So the government added all the necessary steps will be taken to secure the country's national interest, the official outcome of the government's response. Industry bodies have expressed concern with the Federation of Indian Export Organization Sectoral Association highlighting supply chain disruption because of the tariff and competitiveness challenges. So the call for resolution and market diversification strategies reflects the private sector's adaptation to evolving trade diplomacy realities. Now, in the context of India's international trade policy and its not so very good position with the WTO, though we come back to the question whether WTO today has any role or not, or will it have any role or not? What is the future? The International Chamber of Commerce, within the WTO various committees in 2017-18 have suggested certain measures for its reforms. And many say, Professor, that WTO is a victim of its own success. What happened? Because of the success ratio of its dispute settlement procedure, countries tried to include more topics within the WTO rule book. That was no problem. An eventual dispute related to those could then be settled using WTO mechanism now. That was one. The other one was the evolution of the global economy, also added to new concerns to trade relations. E-commerce, competition, investment, etc. Developing countries wanted to advance negotiation on developmental issues, mainly on agriculture. Most of the problem arose because the dispute settlement system itself was weakened by powerful countries, especially America, not allowing reappointment of the appellate body members, thereby making it dysfunctional. Negotiation deadlock, as Professor has pointed out by all speakers and also initial remark by Professor Benjamin, there's a deadlock. These deadlocks have resulted in going parallel to WTO agreements, that countries are now entering into pluralistic agreements. Of course, within the umbrella of the WTO. The appellate body crisis, by not making any appointment, all these have resulted in weakening the WTO. Nevertheless, I don't know, I'm not a student of international trade in that sense, but I'm a student of geopolitics. With US and Russia, China, the triangular power, all on other sides. Smaller countries, the developing countries, least developed countries, maybe some European nations, could play a major role in bringing together all these partners within the framework of WTO so that we could avoid trade war in the context of geopolitical happenings right now. With these few initial remarks, because everything has already been told, I thank the organizers, for giving me a wonderful opportunity for me to gain knowledge, enhance my knowledge by listening to all erudite speakers. I thank my good friend Syed for constantly keeping me awake by sending messages, sir. August 2nd is your presentation. Thank you so much. And thank you, Sarah, for that beautiful biodata reading. Thank you so much. All the best to all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your concluding remarks and your perspectives on India's FTA, CPAs, and regional agreements. To conclude with this, I request Ms. Sarah Benjamin to deliver a vote of thanks for today's program, and we shall wind up after. Yes.
Good evening to one and all present here. It is my great honor to propose the vote of thanks at the conclusion of this thought-provoking international webinar on the future of WTO, decline and reformation, hosted by the Department of Studies in Law, University of Mysore. We begin by expressing our deepest gratitude to the esteemed leadership of our university, our chief patron, Professor Dr. Lotnath N.K., Honorable Vice Chancellor, and our patron, Srimati M.K. Savita, Registrar, University of Mysore, in their absence. Their guidance and unwavering support have been the foundation upon which the successful webinar was built. Our sincere thanks to the chief guest, Professor Dr. Sheila Rai, Professor of Law, National Law University, Odisha, for her insightful address and for setting the tone for critical reflection on the current and future role of the WTO in the global trade governance. We also extend our warmest appreciation to the guest of honor, Professor P. Sri Sudha, Professor of Law, SRM School of Law, Chennai, for sharing her announced and engaging perspectives that enrich today's discourse. A special note of appreciation to our keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Srinivasulu N.S., Professor of Law at West Bengal National University of Juridical Sciences, for a scholarly contribution and for raising pertinent questions about WTO's institutional resilience and reform. We are equally thankful to our distinguished speakers, Professor Dr. Tilotama Ray Chowdhury of National University of Juridical Sciences, Kolkata, and Professor Dr. V. Sudesh, Dean, Faculty of Law, University Law College and Department of Studies in Law, University of Bangalore, whose presentations brought in diverse academic lenses and deep policy insights into the ongoing debate on the WTO's global relevance. A heartfelt thank you to our organizing secretary, Professor Dr. M.S. Benjamin, for his visionary leadership and tireless effort in guiding the academic direction of this event. And to Mr. Syed Kudrat Hashmi, PhD scholar and webinar coordinator, whose meticulous planning and execution made this webinar seamless and impactful. Last but not least, I extend my gratitude to the technical team. Your unseen yet indispensable contributions ensure that the webinar reached a wide and